Hello. This episode of Pride Transformation interview Max Mednik, who is the founder of AMA Capital Management, which is a hedge fund. He also used to work at Google. He was an engineer at Google. He also started a company in the law space. And we're going to hear about all of that stuff. We're also going to hear about just kind of how he applies some of the ideas from investing and risk management and those kind of things to life and you know how he learned some of these things and how he learned them either through investing or from his family or his upbringing and those kind of things. We talk about how it's probably a good idea to apply some of these ideas to kids as well. We both have kids and we kind of vibe on that for a little while. There's a lot of things to cover in this episode. It's a pretty great one. It's one of my favorite conversations I've had so far. So hope you guys like this. Let's get it going. Welcome to the Pride Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Smoots. In this podcast, we explore, actually, there's no we, it's just I. I'm the only person here. And really, I just ramble for 2 or 3 minutes on a technology or business topic. And occasionally, I'll interview some smart folks. If you like that kind of thing, enjoy. Welcome back. I'm here with Max Mednik. Thanks for jumping on the podcast with us today. So Max, maybe you can kind of tell us, you're like an entrepreneur and you ran a hedge fund for a while.
Yep.
So we'll talk about that for sure.
Yeah.
Not in super crazy detail because obviously it's a hedge fund. So, but I'd love to kind of just hear, about, your origin story and how you became to be an entrepreneur and, what attracted you to taking this leap.
I think it's something I've always been interested in. When I was in high school, I was kind of interested in technology and computer science. And then I went to college. I studied that same stuff. And I was lucky enough to go to Stanford. And at Stanford, there's like a really big entrepreneurial culture. So I got exposed to a lot of classes and people who were working on startups and the whole like venture capital community and all this stuff. And I took some really good classes on high-tech entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial marketing and different things. And so that kind of exposed me to a lot of different things. And just being in Silicon Valley area, we took like lots of field trips to different tech companies and startups. And so it's something that I was exposed to in those days. And I feel like for me, I've always been interested in just working on my own projects and on my own stuff. And just personality wise, it's a good fit for me because I like building new stuff and I like kind of being in control of my own destiny, which kind of entrepreneurship allows you to do.
That's great. And so are you working on anything specific these days?
These days, in terms of startup stuff, I'm actually trying to figure out the next thing to jump into. In the last few months, I've been experimenting with angel investing as a way to support interesting startups that I believe in and that are in industries that I think are going to grow over time. And I'm mostly using it as a way to just meet lots of interesting founders and teams and look at a lot of different companies to try to figure out the next thing I want to jump into, whether one of those companies or just a new project that I start. As you know, last year I played around a lot with cryptocurrency space, learned a lot about that. Good year to play around with it. Yeah. And just now I'm kind of thinking about that as well as other potential areas that could be interesting to start another company in. But I don't have anything specific at the moment. Just the angel investing stuff is a way to try to find interesting companies to support and eventually land on the next idea I want to work on.
Are there any specific, verticals that you're super deep in angel-wise?
So I'm kind of focusing on the intersection between software automation and the physical world. Things like autonomous vehicles, robotics, food technology, medical devices. So things that are like automation, AI, just software stuff applied to a real world problem that can hopefully have a big impact on something tangible. So the areas I'm not interested in are things that are kind of purely software or informational, like social media or gaming or entertainment, or just pure like advertising technology stuff. So things that are things that are purely informational, I'm less excited by, and things that are somehow touching people or touching the world in a direct physical way, and automating that, I'm more excited by. And I think those are the things that are gonna, I can see being an important part of our future in the next 10 plus years. And so in terms of like an angel time horizon, it kind of makes sense to bet on those kind of more longer term technologies.
So it's almost like, was it atoms, not bits?
In a sense. And what I like is something that's like applying software ideas or some sort of software intuition or automation to making the atoms behave better, or make them more efficient, make them do stuff more intelligently. That kind of thing is exciting to me.
So what drives you, or like what's the motivator or driver behind that excitement? Is it, what do you think?
I think it's just, I can remember like when I was a little kid, when I was like probably like 6 or something, and I had my first computer, and there was a really stupid program that someone gave me on a floppy disk. I remember, like, I don't know, those 3.5-inch discs, that it was it was just an executable that you double clicked and your CD drive would open, and it was like a joke. It was like a coffee holder. I don't know if you ever ran across this thing. It was a joke, but the fact that I could click something on the computer and then something physical would happen, for me as like a 6-year-old, it was really, really cool, even though it was a very stupid use case. But that kind of thing just got me excited. And we were talking about like theatrical lighting design before this, and something I was involved in. And the thing that I liked most about that was programming into the computer what the lights would do on the theater over time. And I would just press a button, and then stuff on stage would change. And even different like moving lights would move in a way that I programmed. And so just, that's another example of just like software doing stuff in the real world to create an effect that you want. And even the hedge funds finance stuff that I've been involved with is essentially like using software to affect some change in the world. That's less physical and that's kind of more virtual, but at least it is real money. It's kind of something in between. But just this idea of like writing software that deals with something real is just exciting and interesting to me.
So was there a specific time that you, because the AMA Capital Management was your first venture, right?
Yeah.
So which was your hedge fund?
Yes.
You can kind of talk about that in a second. But was there, maybe you can kind of rewind back to when you started that. What kind of made you want to take that leap? Was there something that pushed you? Was it an opportunity you saw? How did that play out?
Yeah, it was an opportunity I saw. I basically had friends who were doing currency trading in college, and they were teaching me about it and kind of getting me into it, and just making money in their dorm rooms, just trading.
That's Stanford.
Yeah.
I had friends who were drinking booze. I went to school at UNLV. That's hilarious.
I mean, I had friends who were also drinking booze, but and these same friends were both drinking booze and trading
at the same time.
Maybe they were trading better when they had a little bit of booze. I remember like in coding classes, there was some friends of mine hypothesizing like the optimal amount of beer to get you like into a good like coding like rhythm, but too much is bad. So anyway, I had friends who were just trading, and this is back in the day, like when day trading was popular, but there was not like a lot of API trading and a lot of like all these platforms that exist now. So it's very early days, and I just had this random idea of like maybe you can write software to do this kind of like just currency day trading automatically. And I had no idea like what a hedge fund was, or are there APIs or anything. So for me, the drive to start it was basically just this curiosity of like, can you do this kind of thing? Can we write a program to try to do trading automatically? And so we just started experimenting with it and just built it while we were juniors, still in college, and started running it out of our dorm room. So it was just a fun thing to work on.
It's such a fascinating story. So you effectively created a algorithmic trading fund in college in your dorm room. Right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah, and we didn't know anything about any other funds out there, and like who else might be doing anything like this. And I think back when we were starting this around 2004, 2005, there probably were not a ton of players in this space, and so we just kind of learned things as we went along.
How has the space changed since then?
I mean, there's been a lot more just attention and technology build out and infrastructure build out and more companies doing stuff. It's hard to know exactly what everyone does because people are kind of secretive about their strategies. But I know that there's just been a lot more growth, at least in like the currency space that we've operated in, and obviously in like stock trading and all these different dark pools and tons of new liquidity providers out there in all the different areas. So there's been just a ton more because back when we started, it was just kind of just the beginning of like the transition from like voice dealing and like trading floors to electronic trading, and like there were like articles and magazines devoted to like this new trend of electronic trading. And like over the time that we worked on the company, it's been like 13 years now. It's kind of like swapped places. Like pretty much everything's electronic, and like there's like very small holdouts in different markets that are like done manually or like just in terms of the volumes done. So it's kind of now pretty much almost everything is just electronic, and most things are automated. And there's still a small amount of manual trading done. And just a lot of the things that have happened in the financial markets, like Lehman Brothers collapse, like Bear Stearns, JP Morgan, all these regulatory things that have happened, Dodd-Frank, they've kind of both created lots of just turbulence and also dried up liquidity. And sometimes there were times of too much volatility. Sometimes after that, not enough. So it's been a lot of just different environments to adapt to over time that have created some opportunities, but also just some challenges over time.
So how does that, I guess this transition from, the kind of old school, broker on the phone, I guess Wall Street, the movie style, like trading stuff with Bud Fox. How's it transition from that, to electronic, and like, how does that transition actually affect regular investors? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think for regular investors, it's a positive thing. I think that there's way more efficiency. There's way lower fees. The market acts more efficiently. Prices are discovered faster, better. Prices are lower. Generally speaking, I think if you're a long-term, just normal retail investor, it's better for you. I don't think that people are like massively taking advantage of like the little guy, and I don't believe some of those stories. I think generally speaking, if you're like investing a couple times a year, 401k, whatever, like you invest every month, once a month, like that kind of thing where you're not like actively timing the market or trying to like be a trader, and you're investing for long term, I think generally speaking, it's better for you, and the market generally operates better. I think there are times though, and there are situations where normal people who don't have like the best technology and the best connectivity and like multi-million-dollar like setups with different like banks and connectivity providers and servers and stuff, it's a lot harder to compete with some of those bigger banks and proprietary trading shops that have those resources to be able to be faster than you at different places or have access to different pools of liquidity. And so there's like pros and cons to it, but generally speaking, for normal people, I think it's better. That's
great. Now, there's a concept that's used in investing quite a bit, and I think it's really interesting, and maybe you can kind of explain it to us. And it's the concept of a hedge, right? What could you maybe talk about what a hedge is?
Yeah. So essentially it's if you have some sort of exposure to some event or some situation, like let's say you're a farmer and you're going to be harvesting a bunch of soybeans in the next 3 months, and you're going to sell them in the market, but you don't know if the price of soybeans is going to go up or down over the next 3 months, and you have all these crops on your farm that one way or another you're going to harvest and you're going to sell. You would hope that price of soybeans is going to remain the same as it is now or go up, and it would kind of be better for you. But if it just goes down a ton, it'd be bad for you because you planted all these crops, you paid for the seeds and all the like maintaining them over time. So you kind of have a risk to a certain set of events like weather or the price of soybeans and whatever that'll affect your long-term, your economic situation. And so a hedge is a way to minimize some of those risks or address some of those risks. And you can do that a number of different ways. Like you can buy another financial instrument to act as a hedge against some of those risks. So that was kind of the initial impetus for the creation of the futures market, and the futures contract is a way for farmers to lock in certain prices so that they wouldn't be so that they could just focus on like harvesting and planting crops and selling them in the market without being exposed as much to like intraday, intra-week price movements. So a farmer could hedge his price risk by buying a 3-month futures contract for delivering soybeans in 3 months and lock in the price today, and know that he can basically make a specific amount of money and therefore be perfectly hedged in that situation.
Thanks for that overview. Is there a way that I guess regular people could use this, us mere mortals, and it's such a great concept. I think it's such a good concept, being able to like understand your downside and those kind of things. Is there?
I mean, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things that essentially you can do in various life situations to do that kind of thing. Where if you think about what really bad situations could affect your life or could affect like your economics in different parts of your life, you can look and see if there are hedging instruments or hedging contracts or things you can do to address those. So like one example is like, if let's say you're going to invest a decent amount of money into some like new car or some large asset, crazy expensive computer system of like something experimental though. You're worried that like, what if this thing stops working or the company goes bankrupt or whatever? You're going to have this big kind of exposure, this big investment. So what you could do is you could buy that car or that asset or whatever, and also buy some put contracts or some options, or like sell some futures against the company, in a sense that you'd basically limit your downside risk on if something bad happens to that asset. So just thinking about if you're going to make a big purchase, how you can essentially insure against like and like cap your downside exposure. You could like that could be through a financial instrument. It could also just be just contractually, like if you're going to be signing a contract with like somebody who's going to build stuff for your house, maybe you can add provisions to it that would kind of protect you in case bad things happen, or how much would repairs would cost in the future. Just things that are basically like taking future scenarios that you're afraid of, bringing them to the present in some way, and paying for some essentially like a small insurance policy or a small like contract that can help you hedge against that kind of risk. And another way, like non-financially, another way to kind of use the same concept is just thinking about the risks in your life and trying to structure your life in a way that you don't engage in activities, or you don't do things that create like huge asymmetries in terms of like having a huge potential downside risk, and just trying to structure like how you live or how you work or different things, just thinking with this like hedging mentality. So a lot of like stuff I've read on that is by like Nassim Taleb, and he's written a lot of stuff around like how to like set up different parts of your life in a way that you can benefit from like good things that happen while having like a capped downside in a sense. So I definitely recommend a lot of his books to learn more about this stuff as it applies to normal people's lives.
Yeah, that's that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I have two kids now. One that's, I think she's like 2.5 or so, and then a way younger one, 8 months. And there was an episode where I talked about how I got in an Uber accident, right? And now I'm kind of trying to minimize my exposure to riding an Uber, honestly. So I think it can be applied to a lot of different things. It's just about like taking action and really understanding the risks and managing them, right? As opposed to, just accepting that crap happens in the future. You can say, oh, well, crap happens, but let me find out the things that can be devastating and then either pay something or just not expose myself to that at all or whatever it may be.
Right.
I stopped flying since I had kids because, there's a small chance that something will go wrong. And it's kind of like, what's the point of taking that chance on? It's just, I'm a pilot, I still do fly with TWA with American Airlines or something, but I don't fly my Cessnas anymore. Right.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So that kind of thing is really interesting. So, so and then, something else I wanted to kind of talk about is you have a kid, right?
Yep.
And, there's like a few conversations we've had that I thought were really, really great conversations about, how the kid, I don't know if you want to mention his name or not. I'll leave that up to you. But how your child forces you to learn things that you would normally learn. I would love for you to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is the big topic I've thought a lot about just because since my son was born, like over 2 years ago, it's been like probably the biggest focus of my life has been just taking care of him and learning about parenting and just diving deep into that. So I spent a lot of time just thinking about like all that stuff that you just mentioned. I think for me, there's kind of like a few different areas that I've kind of thought about and learned about towards that. One is just, I think the kid forces you to change as a person in the way that's like most difficult for you and in the way that you probably most need. I think kids have a very good sense for where you're most kind of off balance or unsure of yourself or not quite steady. And they kind of figure out how to like hone in exactly and zero in right on that. So I'm kind of like control freak, hyper organized, like super scheduled and like very like kind of strict and careful and detail oriented. And kids are a lot more like present in the moment, go with the flow. They go after their spontaneous interests. They can like dive deep into something and then just like quickly switch gears whenever they get interested in something else. And that kind of stuff is really hard for me to do. And so just spending more time with my son and having him kind of literally fight back against my natural way of being more like organized and like according to like an external schedule has forced me to learn to kind of relax more and not be so schedule driven and detail oriented and organized, and that's probably better for me as a parent and as a person to learn how to be able to be more flexible in how I operate and not always be super just controlling. So I think the kids kind of force you to change in a way that's good for you as a person, but the most difficult and the most kind of hard for you to do. And the other is just things I've learned about the world and about us as people through seeing how we develop like when we're super little, because obviously none of us remembers like first couple of years that we're alive. And this person, if it's like your biological son is or child is like kind of like half of you, like, and you kind of see yourself and obviously the situation is different, like you're in a different place and everything, but you can kind of see like time travel in a sense and see how you were when you were that little in kind of an approximation, and learn about yourself that you don't know, you don't remember those years. So you get to notice aspects of your personality that maybe you had when you were little and kind of got maybe squashed or diminished by school or by various like experiences in your life. You get to see how kids like have this like sense of wonder and curiosity and just like appreciation for little things that you kind of lose after a while of getting just acclimated to the world. And it's really fun just seeing all the things that are new to them and kind of relearning that. And kind of the third area that I've kind of thought about in parenting that I've learned a lot about is just that the notion that like you come out like into the world and you're like extremely like unskilled and you don't know how to do like pretty much anything except for just like breathe and cry and like eat and sleep if like the conditions are right. And but you have this brain that can like learn like crazy. Like it's ridiculous how just adaptable and like quick to learn a kid is. Like with like one or two exposures to a word or a concept or a thing, like they will remember it for like weeks, months. And it's like for us to learn something new like that, it has to be like tons of repeated exposures, and like you're gonna lose it super quickly. So just the brain is so much like faster and more adaptable and can learn so much more quickly, but it has so little just like data in its hard drive and facts about the world and the skills and ability to move its body. So many things we take for granted, like picking up a cup or like putting your pants on or like putting down an object like carefully. They have no idea how to do it. And it takes a couple like years to learn all these little things that we do every day, multiple times a day, and just seeing how much struggle it takes and how much like frustration and to learn to walk or get up or like pick up something. And then after a while they kind of get it. And it's like, you just see these like little transition points that they couldn't do this thing yesterday, but now they can do it. And just in a sense, how kind of magical it is that they automatically learn these things, but also just how much of like a process it is to learn that. And on the one hand, it's like amazing that pretty much after like, I don't know, 3 or 5 years, they can pretty much do all the major things that we can do in terms of walk, run, talk, eat, whatever normal stuff. But they couldn't at the beginning. And the question I always think about is like, in what ways are we as adults like babies in a sense of not being able to do things that if someone else looked at us like a much older adult or like another like society or rate or like whatever species that they can do because they somehow were able to keep evolving and growing. Like maybe there's a weird thing we can do with our hands that no one's figured out yet, but if we just practice it or somehow we got exposed to it, we could learn to do these like weird things with our body that we don't know how to do yet, or with our mind, or so just that kind of thing. Like because babies and young kids, like they don't even realize they can't walk. They kind of are interested and they notice stuff and they can try to get up and they fall, and then one day they just figure out how to do it. And they have something in them that's pushing them to do that. But there are probably similar things that we right now don't know that are potentially possible for us. So I like to think about that and think about if we'll ever be able to access that.
How does that affect your worldview? Does it force you to, I guess, think about the potential of things more? Or, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but
definitely. I think that it just makes me realize that I don't think we lose everything about our childlike ability to learn, both like in our brains and our bodies when we like get to maturity. I think that there's still something in each of us that can learn make drastic changes in our minds and bodies and the skills. And so it's exciting for me. I'm more excited about new things I believe I or other people around me can learn about changes we can make to how we live, and just it makes me just more fascinated and interested in other people that I see and skills that I admire in them. And I kind of realize that I think kind of just inborn talent is less critical to the success of some people, and it's much more about like the really hard work and all the time that someone put into an effort into learning some like really good skill, and I kind of appreciate that more rather than just believing that like, oh, they're really good at it because that's how they were born. So I think it's a lot more about training and discipline and hard work in terms of what I attribute other people's success to, just from noticing how we grow up.
So it's more of a nurture versus nature.
I'm leaning more towards that in terms of the like attributing other people's success and skill development. But I also at the same time, like as a parent of a young kid, have realized how much of a role I think nature does play. And I think it's way more than it's politically correct to admit. But I think that it's like, I think so much is determined by your genes, and as long as your environment is acceptable and fine for you, you can probably develop to whatever potential your genes have like prescribed. And if you work extra hard, or your parents like create really good environment, or somehow like you find the right mentors or teacher or whatever, you can kind of like, it's not that like everything is predetermined by genes. I think that if you can work super hard and you can still achieve like a super high level and be really successful. So I don't think it's everything genes, but I think there's just so much that is by genes that we don't totally understand yet. Just because I already noticed things that like in my son that are in me or in my wife, and like it's just crazy how certain things like pass on, and like little personality things or little quirks or little just behavioral things, memory and just other things that it's really interesting how that happens. But yeah, I don't think we totally understand. I think we have a very bad understanding of how those kinds of things work so far.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and that's something I've actually noticed quite a bit too with my with my kids. There's a definite place for nurture, obviously, but there's certain things that I just like. My son, who doesn't speak, he just smiles and makes facial expressions. You can tell that he's inclined to certain. There's just like there's a predisposed, I don't know, something there towards certain things. Like he loves music when music is playing, those kind of things. It's really kind of odd.
Yeah.
And it's not like I gave him that. That's something, I love music, so maybe it came from me genetically, or I don't know,
Yeah.
That's a whole different conversation. But that's actually really, really interesting. There's something that you mentioned as you were talking, just about how kids have this innate drive to learn. And I agree with that. I think the kids definitely do. The one thing I think that happens is as we grow up, somehow that diminishes, right? I mean, why do you think that is? You're obviously not an expert.
I think I mean, I think there's a couple things. One is by going to school and by kind of fitting into this kind of like pipeline and this track, it forces us to spend time on learning more traditional kind of just structured things that we need to know to be able to both like operate in society and also do things that are like societally acceptable or that our parents want. So like go to school, then high school, then college, and get a job. And you need to learn calculus, and you need to learn chemistry, and you need to take science classes and English classes and all this stuff, even if you're not interested in all those things. And to have enough time to deal with that, we're going to have less time to just pursue our own organic interests. So one is just like fitting into whatever kind of like track that, whether you think that's a good thing or not, but like for most people, they're on that, they're kind of on that plan. And so that is one thing. And I think the other is just, I think as we grow up, we just kind of get, I have maybe like almost like hedonic adaptation, or just like we just kind of get used to the world around us enough. And I think our brain, like through various mental models, and just like at some point there's like you start realizing all this information flowing to you, and you start kind of filtering and focusing on the things that get more interesting for you. And so as you start like focusing on the areas that you're more interested in, you start kind of just like having less mental bandwidth for just totally wide open learning and just like following your interests in wherever they may lead. So maybe as a young kid, you start getting into one or two sports, and then maybe like some random game, and you're really interested in those worlds. And there's all this depth in those worlds that you can pursue. And you just start kind of like shutting out a little bit other things that you could get into. And so as you get older, you kind of start, in a sense, like filtering more and more. And then you have like less of this like natural urge to just like learn about everything. And then I think just as we get older, we just start like getting more busy and dealing with like random responsibilities and things that we have to deal with. And so we just, I don't know, we kind of excuse ourselves from learning by having all of these things that we feel like we need to do. I don't think that's the way it has to be. I think there are people who are really good at forcing themselves to keep learning and taking on challenges and pushing themselves as adults and like as professionals, and they kind of just carve out the time for it. Um, but I think if you're just gonna like follow like whatever momentum is leading you as just like a normal adult with work and with like family and all this stuff, you kind of just like naturally just start having less energy to just like keep learning unless you really like prioritize and push yourself to do it.
I think you mentioned you kind of talked about this during. I think it was the first point you made. The concept of like an optimization, so people kind of start optimizing towards what they're good at or what they're interested in or whatever. And my question is, I think that's true also. My question is, how do we avoid from getting to a like local optimum, right? So there's a concept in statistics that there's a like a kind of a good within a small sphere and then a good globally, right? So like how do we keep from doing that? Is there something that we can do that kind of jar ourselves out of that local optimum? Where just the canonical example would be something where somebody's like, well, I go to a restaurant, I eat the same food every time because it works for me, and they never try anything else on the menu. But maybe some of those stuff's pretty good. They just don't for some reason, think about trying or go to a different restaurant because maybe they like something better. So how do you do you think there's a way for us to kind of break or free ourselves from that?
Yeah, I've thought about this question because I am kind of an optimizer in terms of my personality. I think about that stuff. But before I answer that, like I also want to question like the question overall, like whether that makes sense, because it kind of depends on what your end goal is. Like, I'm not sure if there's one global optimum for like your life objective. Like, if your goal is like to be happy or enjoy life, maybe you reach some local optimum that you're happy with, or like the guy in the restaurant, and you kind of just chug along and you're super happy. Like that might be fine. So I don't know if people need to necessarily always just like worry that like they're stuck in the local optimum, and like what if there's like some global optimum they're missing. Like, although I do think about that as well, but I don't know if that's exactly the right problem to be solving. And I often am a person who goes to restaurants and picks the same thing, because once I find something I like, I'm happy to just keep eating it. So sometimes I'm okay not totally optimizing, but I think the bigger thing for me is like I'm a super picky eater. So for me, the cost of experimenting is kind of high, because if something sucks, I'm a lot less okay with eating stuff that like is something that I really don't like, or is like way too spicy or whatever. So I'd rather stick with like stuff that I know is good or very good, as opposed to take all these risks to get something that's like truly amazing. But maybe it's because like food is not like my top priority. But I think the way you would solve that is kind of like, I don't know, there's probably some term in machine learning for what you're talking about, but essentially you make a random, like you take random jumps from that local. You just start taking steps in like a random direction, and then you start re-optimizing from there in the hope that you'll maybe start going up a new kind of slope to reach what might be the real global optimum. And so in real life, that could mean you just start experimenting with, what if I just randomly try a new activity? Or what if I go shadow this like totally different job that maybe I could be interested in, but I haven't really spent any time on? Or you just read very widely, so you're exposed to lots of stuff, so that if you learn more about different fields, you might realize like, I'm working in this one area and I'm really good and it's fine, but there's this other area I've been learning about and I think I'd be even better at that. And now that I know more about it, I could go and take the next step to actually try something in that area. So I think just like exposing yourself to a lot of different things and just making little random experiments in different areas could help you see if there's a bigger optimum in store for you somewhere else. And I know people who are very good at what they do, and they've tried to do other things and they've realized that they can't not do like the one thing that they're really good at. And so that kind of tells them, at least for that kind of person, that they've probably found a pretty good optimum for their life and they can enjoy it and be happy. I think the more tricky cases for other people, which I think I'm more in this other camp of like, I don't have like one singular like passion or like crazy like burning like vision of like I have to be doing like this thing only, and I can't see myself not doing this one thing only. And so and often like I think artists are more along the lines of like if they're not doing their art, they are totally like off balance and like they can't imagine their life not doing that art. Whereas like I don't know, like engineers or builders or just like professionals in some way are kind of, I mean, I feel like I'm more of a generalist in terms of being able to do lots of different things and operate in different capacities, which makes it a little bit more challenging for me to know like exactly what I should be doing at all times and solve that optimization.
You know, there's something you mentioned in there, which was the when we were talking about the food, right? You said there was the cost of exploring and trying something. Yeah, I'd love for you to elaborate on that. I think that's such a great concept, and I'd love for you to just kind of talk about like how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, just whenever I think like just the idea of like cost benefit, whether that's like from economics or like a mental model of some sort, but just like thinking about like things you could gain from trying something uncertain versus the cost of trying it. So there's always some costs in whatever experiment you're going to run, whether at minimum it's just your time that you could be spending on something else, or not having the, like, I love barbecue chicken pizza and I can have that at CBK, but there's like a bunch of other good things at CBK. And the cost of trying something else is like my time. Maybe I'm not going to enjoy the other thing. I'm not going to get the benefit of the pizza that I really love. And so I always think like whenever I make any decision or to try something uncertain, I think about like what could be the benefits of that like experiment and what could be the costs. And just having like gone through lots of like bad decisions or bad outcomes, I've kind of collected like a bunch of experiences that have told me like to have it kind of given me a checklist of things to think about, like that could be costs that you might not immediately think about. In terms of like the stuff we were talking about near the beginning of the conversation, like bad scenarios that could happen that you may want to hedge against. I did a big project in terms of like remodeling or like construction on my house, and just like it was just all these things went wrong and took forever, and there were all these problems. And now like for future things, I realized that like the cost of like, oh, we want to like put in like a very, very small new thing in the house. Like the cost is not just like the cost of putting in that thing. It's like the time you're going to spend like haggling with the people, the time you're going to spend fixing problems that go wrong, the time you're going to spend on like the second order effects. Like once you put in that thing, there could be effects on other things in your house that they will stop working, or you're going to have to improve them or upgrade them or change them, or it's going to start like encroaching on something else that then you need to spend your time fixing those things. And so, and then maintaining it, like think about the cost of ownership and the cost of maintaining something. So this is less about the food example and more just like other things. Like, if you're just going to buy like a camera for your house, it's not just like the cost of the camera. It's like the cost to set it up, the cost to maintain it, how easy is it to fix it, to move it, like all these things. So, and then when something goes wrong, like how difficult is it going to be to fix it? So just thinking about like, just imagining lots of scenarios in your head and trying to like quantify or like at least get a sense for how costly it'll be. And usually things that are good, they're worth that. Like the benefits should outweigh all those costs. But the more that you can try to outline these in your head or perhaps even written down, the better decision maker I think you'll be over time. And the more of these costs that you can try to like minimize up front by setting up like your contract the right way, or just finding the right vendor for whatever. Like I just read Ray Dalio's Principles, which I think you read also, and he's a big fan of like writing down all of your like criteria and all of the things that go into a decision. I haven't been doing that much, but I think that's something I want to be doing more of, and I think over time, like you'll be able to get better at thinking about these costs and comparing like benefit and cost.
Is there like a good threshold to think about, to kind of keep in mind? Is it, if something is, let's say, I don't know, if something could benefit you, or maybe be twice as good or something than what you're looking at or than what you're doing currently? Like, what's the threshold in your mind?
I don't know. I feel like it depends on every situation. Theoretically, like if you're thinking about like a project with like some sort of financial component, if you boil down to like net present value, and like over time, just the net present value concept like is basically like the best measure for any sort of like economic project. And that just like if you kind of like bring to the present in terms of the time value of money, like all of the potential benefits and all the potential costs. And if it's at all positive, you should do it. Because theoretically the cost should incorporate all of the various costs, including your time and whatever. So theoretically the threshold is 0. Like if it's over 0, you should do it. But in real life, like you're probably not going to, the time is the other thing that's kind of hard to quantify and bring into it. And so just because you can't literally do every single project, you start to prioritize them and you start doing the ones that are highest net present value first. And so for me, like it's something I definitely think about. Like I could go improve a couple things in my life or in my house or whatever. And yeah, if the threshold is very marginal, I'm not going to do that. Just because the other thing is we don't have perfect information. And even though you can like model the various costs like in your head or on paper, you still don't, there's other things that could happen that could come up that you haven't predicted. And usually with things that you're trying to intervene in as like a human being in your life or your house, or like little things that you're trying to, these like card castles that you're building up of technology, and then you try to just kind of tweak one part, it's much more likely that like something bad can happen that'll just like mess up the whole system than randomly something very good happening. And so that's another thing to think about, is just like what are the considering the impact of unexpected events and just like the cost that you haven't even considered. So the benefit of doing something should be quite like substantial. I don't have a rule of thumb that I use, like, but it should be like twice as good. Like it should be like an order of magnitude good, like better than to be worth it than just like, oh, I could make something like 5 or 10% better. So theoretically, I should go and do that. But again, like whenever you introduce some change, there could be all these like second and third order effects that basically make the benefit like go away.
How much of this thinking do you think came from your experience doing the hedge fund stuff? Because it sounds like you're assessing potential investments, right?
Yeah. I think some of it came from that. I think a lot of it came from just like classes and coursework I did, because I studied a lot of stuff around like decision theory and like managing projects and investments and stuff. So it's like a field that I've been interested in. So some of it is kind of more like formal education. Some of it is definitely from like the investing side. Although I think most of the focus on the investing side has been around technology and around just like trading execution and like making smart trading decisions, which is a little bit different than this kind of economic analysis. And maybe it's just like the way I think. I feel like a lot of this was also ingrained in me by like my grandfather, who like so many times I would spend time with him, and he would like try to teach me lessons around basically like two major themes that I can remember. One is this like cost benefit thing, and like he would talk to me about like cost benefit stuff, and also the other element that he would always talk to me about is like situational awareness, and like every decision and situation and action should have like a proper like time and place, and thinking about like actions like in one time and place may be good, and then in a totally different time and place maybe bad or counterproductive, or like not as well received by the other person. And so just thinking about like appropriateness and time and place, as well as this cost benefit stuff. I think like honestly, like my grandfather taught me, and I feel like was like I was quite impressionable when I heard those lessons, and so it probably just has stuck with me throughout the years.
Yeah, are these things, or have you started to, teach your kid these things?
Not yet. I
No.
think it's too abstract. Like I don't think he can understand like the concept of like I don't think he can yet like do inequalities in his head. Like you need to understand like more and less for like in a very like the benefit has to be more than the cost. I think he can understand like a good thing and a bad thing, and like if something has more good things than bad things, it's overall good. But I think just like this kind of mathematical thinking, I think he's developing that. I think he understands like there's more of there's sometimes I've kind of been trying to see like when he's going to figure out like, but I think it's around like 3 or so that they learn like that this pile has more than this pile, and then the subtraction stuff like how many more this one has is like even later. So to like actually totally understand it, I think it's going to be like in a few years, but he's already kind of starting to pick up like for sure he knows like 1 versus 2 and 2 versus 3 or more. I think those are the categories in his head. He knows like 1,
One
he
and
knows 2,
Yeah.
and then he knows like lots of stuff. That's kind of how he counts, like 1, 2, lots and lots. That's basically how if I ask him like how many are in something. And so you can kind of see how like his brain is starting to like develop some of this like mathematical thinking very naturally. It's not like I'm teaching him this stuff. And so I think like when he starts understanding it better, then I can maybe start teaching him for sure the situational stuff like that I am kind of teaching. I think any parent does that.
Yeah.
Like here we speak quietly, or like
Yeah.
here you can change your clothes or whatever, like that kind of stuff. I think they start learning. But it's more of like these like everyday things in terms of more like higher level stuff. Like when you talk to somebody in a certain way, that's probably going to be later.
All right, so let's shift it up a little bit. I have a new section that I'm adding in here called perception versus reality. So I'll give you kind of a perception that I think a lot of people have for maybe one of your jobs or one of your many hats, and you can tell me what the reality is, right? So for instance, hedge funds, right? Hedge fund managers, yourself. Perception would be like a guy in an expensive suit talking on the phone about deals, throwing money around, going to the bar, look at those kind of things. What's reality like?
I'm sure that happens. I don't know a lot of guys like that. Yeah. But the thing is, I don't run like $100 million, like $1 billion hedge fund that like I'm making crazy money like that. And so, and it's not like that. I even would imagine my life doing that if I did that. But so I think that stereotype, I'm sure it exists. I'm sure there are people like that. But I think there's a lot of other operations and businesses that are investing money and doing trading, and it's a lot more of like software engineering, like at least for what we do and for other places like us. I think it's honestly, it feels more like a software company that happens to be doing trading. And so it's also the fact that we do investing using computers, as opposed to like making deals or like calling people up or like finding like great companies to buy and like talking to like their CEOs and like haggling and random stuff. And so it's just the nature of the investing category and the type of investing we do. But yeah, so there's, I would expand people's view of what a hedge fund manager looks like and what they do, because it should also include people who are just like wearing jeans and t-shirts to work and coding, and that's also kind of being a hedge fund manager.
Okay, then how about startup founder? I think you've done, so there's been the hedge fund and one or maybe 2 companies in between.
Yeah.
What was there's a legal company, right?
Yeah, Redacto. Yeah, that was a legal technology. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Cool. And that was venture backed, right?
That was yeah.
Okay, so perception, startup founder, right? Guy out there in Mashable and in Crunchbase and on stage at these conferences wearing a black collar and those kind of things and talking about the vision. What's reality?
I think that stuff is part of the reality, but it's not the whole reality. Like it's not all just like being on stage and like these pitch contests. And if you're fundraising or if you're like trying to do like a lot of like big marketing events, then that is a big part of it. Like pitching investors and working on the pitch. And unfortunately, it's super time consuming and they can just take over your life if you're just doing fundraising. And there's a lot of like very unglamorous work that goes into that in terms of like the financial model and like figuring out the right wording and positioning and like getting like customer traction data and analytics and stuff incorporating your pitch. And just there's just like a lot of work that goes into it that is not, you don't really see on stage or in these TV shows and stuff. But if you're not like in fundraising mode or you're not like on stage, which is probably like 90% of the time, you are just like honestly grinding and doing like work that is usually very difficult and uncertain. And you're trying to do stuff that's most people are saying no to. Like you're going to people, you want them to work with you. They're like, no, we don't want to work with you. Or they're working with your competitor or this big established company. You're meeting with a bunch of people and they're like, no, we don't want your thing. You want to recruit a bunch of employees. They don't want to work for you. They want to work somewhere else. And like, you're just constantly trying to like persuade and like talking about what you're working on and also trying to like build the business, and whether it's coding your application or working with like your engineers to like make sure that like answering their questions about like, do we build it using this or this? Is this going to be on the left side or the right side? And like making tons of minute decisions around your product that the end user doesn't really realize until they just see the final thing. But so much work went into all these edge cases and all this thinking to finally deliver that. So it's honestly just like a lot of execution, a lot of work that a lot of people may not think about.
Cool. Okay, so one more. Now I think you were at Google, and then you left Google to basically hang out with Benji, your son.
Yeah.
So a perception of a guy who hangs out with their kid all day, right? Playing tennis, going to the park, going to the beach, having a beer, watching TV. What's reality?
It is, and it's possible that it's my vision of this reality is because I'm like 2 years in, and it's very much like still like diapers and nursery rhymes, but it's like grueling and lots of work. Like especially if you're spending a lot of part of the day where it's just you and your child. So it's a lot of like diapers and nursery rhymes and putting on shirts and taking off shirts. And as they are super young, it's a lot of like bottles and burping and rocking to sleep and like trying to just like stay alive and survive. And then as they get a little bit older, it's like a lot of like terrorist negotiation techniques.
It's weird how psychological it gets so quickly.
You don't want to like constantly bribe and punish. You want to kind of convince the kid, but and be respectful of them. But you also have things you need to do. Like if you agree to go to a birthday party or a class that you paid for or whatever, or you're meeting your friend at the park, you got to get out the door at a certain time. And they don't like that pressure and they will kind of fight you. And you're constantly like balancing. You're constantly like doing this balancing act between how much to kind of just go with the flow with the kid versus kind of impose a little bit of structure and being firm. And so that's something I'm constantly struggling with, and how to talk to them and convince them. And like, a lot of psychological stuff. So it's a lot of just like, I think it's just a lot of like routine, like days that just like blend into each other, and like you're just a lot of monotony in the early years that gets tiring. So just finding ways to stay interested and find things that you can keep learning and doing, and appreciating just very small changes that you'll see day to day can try to help you get through that. But yeah, it's definitely not beers or tennis. And I think like before, I massively underestimated how difficult parenting is before I was a parent. I was like, yeah, whatever. Like you give them a bottle, they go to sleep, like you play with them, you change the diaper here and there. Like
so easy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
like
easy.
Each of those things is like a world of complexity. Like how to give a bottle, and like 1,000 things can go wrong with that. And like what nipple to use and like how much milk and how to heat it up and it can break and like what do milk or formula and like with breastfeeding, like it's like a world of like
Or
diapers.
milk and formula. What
Yeah, yeah,
percentage of milk and
yeah, and
formula?
like this all this stuff, and like there's all this complexity, there's all these ways it can go wrong, and it constantly changes. Like as soon as you kind of feel like you've adapted to a stage of parenting, the kid changes, and then you kind of have to like readapt. So it's this like arms race. So I think that's a big thing I didn't realize.
Yeah, the arms race is real, man. It really is. Okay, because let's do a little quick fire real quick here. Favorite book?
Favorite book? It's probably still Cryptonomicon by Neil Stevenson.
Okay,
I've loved a lot of his books, but I like sci-fi, and I read that a long time ago. I should probably reread it, but I feel like I just had so much fun reading that.
Okay, productivity tool that you use every day. Just one.
I use ToodleDo for tasks because it's really good at like complex repeating tasks, which a lot of things in my life are like complex repeating tasks, like the third Tuesday of every 2 months or whatever, like do this. So I try to like follow a lot of GTD stuff. I'm trying to write everything down. So I use that
GTD
all
is
the time.
great.
Yeah.
One thing you wish you knew 10 years ago.
I thought about this question. I don't have the best. I don't know if I have like an answer I'm really happy with, but I feel like if I knew like to kind of slow down and enjoy the process, enjoy things more, I think that'd be better. And I think I also wish I knew that that I should spend more time developing like the EQ parts of my brain and like myself and like just emotional intelligence and being better at like talking to people and working through kind of just difficult relationship things like in work relationships and working with like business partners and working with just people on projects and just I feel like I could have been better at those things over the past 10 years and I have had lots of just like tricky struggles and maybe if I knew 10 years ago that that would be important, I could have maybe invested more time and energy into improving in that area and maybe could have done better, but I don't know.
Okay, what advice would you give to people who want to start a hedge fund?
I would say just start doing it. We didn't really ask for permission. We didn't go and learn a bunch of stuff. I feel like that's the pitfall I start falling into when I take on new projects. Now I just start like reading and learning and talking to people instead of actually just trying to do something. And when we started this thing, we did not just start reading, and there was not like a lot of stuff out there. We just started doing it. We just started like coding up very simple stuff and put like a very small amount of money and just started like trading and seeing. And immediately we saw all these things that weren't working and were problems, and we just kind of kept iterating and testing it. But like we got some quick data on whether our initial core idea would make sense or not. So I would say like do some like simulations, but very quickly just like start trying to do it for real on a small amount of money and see if you can your investing strategy, whatever it is, and see if it works.
Okay, cool, man. So that's really all I had today. Thanks
Sweet.
for sitting down. We'll have to get you on again in a couple of years to talk about applying some of those ideas to the kids, the stuff that we mentioned earlier. So thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.